Welcome. My name is Elizabeth Brandt. I'm with Moms Clean Air Force, and I want to welcome you today to this conversation between Moms Clean Air Force and the National Tribal Air Association. We are so excited to have our partners at the NTAA, National Tribal Air Association, with us here today. We have Carol Creeves, and Carol is the chairwoman of the NTAA. She's the environmental director for the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho. Thank you for joining us, Carol.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And I also want to welcome from the National Tribal Air Association, Mariah Ashley. Mariah Ashley is Dene of the Navajo Nation. She's the program coordinator of the National Tribal Air Association. And we also have with us Moms Clean Air Force's own Shayna Oliver, who is the program coordinator for us in Colorado. She works on our Ecomadres Latinx outreach program, and she is a great advocate for Indigenous people's rights as well. So this is part of our Earth Month celebrations, and at Moms, we like to say that we don't just celebrate Earth Month, we fight for it. Moms is an organization of over 1.5 million parents across America who are fighting for clean air and a healthy climate for the health of their kids. I came to this work because I'm a mom of two, and once I gave birth and became a parent, I realized I had to fight for a healthy climate for my own children. So I want to orient you just a little bit to the subject matter we're talking about. We use the term Indigenous to refer to the descendants of people who lived in America before 1492. Others may use the terms Alaska Native or Native Americans. And to clarify, there are Indigenous people all around the world, but we are focusing in this conversation on Indigenous people in the United States. I want to acknowledge that I live on the traditional lands of the Anacostan, Nacotchtank, and Piscataway people. In America, we all reside on the land of Indigenous peoples. We encourage you to learn about Indigenous people who have traditionally lived in your area. You can learn more at the Native Lands website, which features an interactive map of Indigenous peoples around the world. And you can see that link in the chat. We wanted to welcome you and have this conversation because we are highlighting a new joint resource that we've made with the National Tribal Air Association on how air pollution and climate change impact Indigenous people in the United States. So I'm just going to start with a few questions for our panelists. And this one I wanted to direct to Carol. Can you tell us about NTAA, the National Tribal Air Association? Can you tell us about its history and importance? I'd especially like to know how the NTAA helps tribes foster tribal sovereignty.
National Air Association, or NTAA, was founded in 2002 with a grant from the United States Environmental Agency Office of Air and Radiation with a mission to advance air quality management policies and programs, consistent with the needs, interests, and unique legal status of American Indian tribes and Alaska Natives. Since 2002, NTAA has grown to include nearly 153 federally recognized member tribes, making NTAA the nation's second largest tribal membership organization. Tribes are important partners with federal, state, and local agencies to protect ambient air quality, indoor air quality, and mitigate climate change. NTAA's executive committee is comprised of 10 tribal representatives, one from each of the U.S. EPA regions, plus one from Alaska. The officers include the chairperson, the vice chairperson, secretary, and the treasurer. Our mission of NTAA is to advance air quality management policies and programs consistent with the needs, interests, and unique legal status of American Indian tribes and Alaska Natives. The goals of NTAA are to advocate and advance tribal environmental, cultural, and economic interest in the development of air policy and at all levels of government, tribe, federal, state, local, and international. We also promote the development, funding, and capacity building of tribal air management programs. We promote and facilitate air quality policy and technical information that may include research and scientific and medical studies. We also advance and recognize an acceptance of tribal sovereignty authority by conducting effective communication and outreach to states, local, federal, and international agencies, and the general public. We also encourage the support, appropriated consultation with tribal governments in accordance with tribal structures and policies. Oh, and I guess I should, I left out the tribal sovereignty part. Tribal sovereignty for states is, and a lot of people don't quite understand, but we are very much like a state. And so each tribal community has their own set of laws and their bylaws and their own government, and they have their own way of governing their tribal lands. And so that was one right that was given to the tribes under the treaties, and we hold that very dear, and we hold the federal government and everybody on those grounds that we are very capable of governing our lands and our people, and we do so with great pride. And that is part of what NTAA does. We just make our tribes more powerful by helping them create policies and letting them use template letters. And if they have issues, they can come to us, and we will help as a conduit to help resolve some of these issues. So I hand it back over to you, Les.
Thank you so much, Carol. And thanks especially for helping our viewers understand the sovereign rights that Indigenous nations hold. Tribes have a lot of rights and a lot of power. And like any small community, sometimes it's good to have somebody to consult with to learn how to best use that. So I think it's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I'm going to turn to you now, Mariah, but Carol, you're welcome to answer as well. So what is the status of air pollution on tribal lands, and what are some of the most important sources of air pollution?
Hi, all. I'm Mariah Ashley. Just a reminder, I am the program coordinator for NTAA, and usually I like to introduce myself with my clans. So I am Titna Jini, Nishlan, Khanasani, Bashishchin, Nakai Dashiche, Ado, Kia Ani Dashinale. I currently reside in Flagstaff, Arizona, in northern Arizona. Yeah, so for most tribal communities, there's a lot of pollution, and mostly because race is the #1 indicator of placement of toxic facilities in this country. So here in the Navajo Nation, there are 4 major coal-fired power plants that surround the Navajo Nation, but just recently one closed up in Page, Arizona. But pollution comes from all sorts of places. There are 4 main pollution, which is like mobile sources, which comes from cars and trucks, stationary sources, which are, like I said, the coal-fired power plants. It also includes like industry and even sewage treatment. There's also area source pollutions. These come from cities, livestock, fertilizer, oil, and gas. And as we know, in most reservations, there are a lot of exploitations of resources like oil and gas, natural gas especially, which is really prominent on the Eastern Agency side of Navajo Nation. But we've also seen it from like across, the country, what's going on in North Dakota with the pipelines. Another main area of a big concern for air pollution comes from the natural like things like wildfire, which last year we saw the most devastating wildfire in like the country, which happens in California. And there are so many different tribes out in California, hundreds of them, who are impacted by this every day. And it's expected we're going to be seeing the same thing this summer. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Mariah. And that is a really terrifying prospect. I'm from Washington State, which has traditionally not had very serious wildfire problems in the part of the state I'm from, but it's become a very serious health problem for sure. So on that topic, climate change is a crisis that affects all Americans. but it poses unique challenges for Indigenous communities, especially in the West. So could you, Mariah, explain how climate change is impacting Indigenous communities in particular?
Yeah, so it's seen, across the world how climate change is just, causing devastating impacts. And I think the thing that is most important for Indigenous peoples is that with climate change, it's affecting our livelihood, which means, our culture, our traditional medicines are disappearing at like a fast rate due to, high increased temperatures and prolonged drought. And I would just say that as an Indigenous person, I live in Arizona, it's expected to get hotter and drier, but I can't just leave Arizona. This is my homeland. This is where I'm from. This is where my ancestors are from. So I think that puts Indigenous people in like a really, unique position, because unlike other people who can like move across the country to escape floods, we can't do that where, I live. Like I don't want to. And so it's a matter of, protecting, preserving what we have right now. Yeah, and as far as other, Indigenous peoples who are impacted by climate change, I just read an article recently about how this migrant worker had to choose between leaving his family and working in the US, just because climate change is affecting his job. So it's really putting that stress, and it's really impacting people of color and people who, are not rich, to move, So in that way, it's affecting. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Yes, Mariah, I really would. I know there has been great devastation on Alaskan villages with the snowfall reducing every year. That's one thing that always brought the moose and the elk and those types of animals down to them so that they could do their yearly hunting and things like that. With that snowpack, they're not getting that movement of their wildlife so that they can continue to feed their families through their traditional forms. We also have, with the melting of the ice caps, we have Indigenous tribes along the oceanways that are having to leave their homelands. They're just being swallowed up by the water as it encroaches upon their natural territories. And so they are literally having to, move whole villages and people along the way. And again, with the wildfires increasing, we know that that's due to, a lack of precipitation that is happening. And again, as Mariah had mentioned, this is not just going on, here in the United States. It is going on all over the world, and it is really something people need to get a hold of and attack and move forward so that we still have a world for people and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren to be able to, to live. Not to mention the basket weavers, the rain's not there, these natural plants aren't growing, governments come in and fenced off different areas that people can't get, to some of the plants that are existing on the other side of the fence. And a lot of it all is due to the climate change. So thank you for letting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carol and Mariah. And you can read about some of these examples, such as the village of Newtok in Alaska, which had to relocate due to coastal erosion and rising seas, in the resource that we're linking in the chat right now. And I want to encourage you to learn about that, but also the things that Indigenous peoples are doing and tribal governments are doing to make their lands more resilient, which is another thing that we highlight in the resource. Like the Swinomish tribe is doing all kinds of things. They live on the coast of Washington to adapt to their changing conditions and make sure that like their salmon runs will continue to be abundant in the future. I wanted to turn now to Shayna. So Shayna, generations of systemic abuses of Indigenous people have led to chronic poverty, poor healthcare, substandard housing, and disproportionate exposures to pollution. Can you talk about health disparities in Indigenous communities? How do these health disparities relate to air pollution too? Thank you.
Sorry. But Indigenous people, we have the higher rates of asthma, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, mental illness, adverse birth defects, as well as premature deaths in the general population. I myself was born prematurely at low birth weight, diagnosed with asthma in my infancy. And my family and I didn't know about my birth defect until later in life when it impacted my hearing and speech. Many of my people were impacted by these same disparities and being told that these disparities are genetic traits. And our people, we know these health disparities are caused by the contamination related to the industries that have encroached into our reservations, where our treaty rights are abused. Many of my family members check off on a lot of these disparities. And my grandfather, he was one of the many Navajo men and women who worked in the uranium mines before protective gear was provided or required by law. My grandfather, who worked at the coal plant, he was forced to retire due to his continued asthma attacks on the job site. But after he retired, he tried to work doing bus driving, and we know that there's a lot of air pollution on our school buses that run on diesel fuel. And unfortunately, he was not able to be a bus driver for too long due to passing out while he drove. So a lot of his health disparities kept him from working. And on multiple occasions, he was rushed to the ER for frequent asthma attacks, not only from his job, but also from home. My grandmother was the one that always made the phone call to our families about having to take him to the ER on multiple occasions. And I think that's why I like working with Moms Clean Air Force, because Moms Clean Air Force, they advocate for changes that will reduce air pollution and protect us from climate change. And we know that Indigenous people are being exposed to pollution, more pollution than the population at large. And that is one of the underlying reasons we experience higher levels of various illnesses. On these issues relating to air pollution and impacts on health, Moms Clean Air Force provides resources informing us how oil and gas impacts and the health of mothers and babies, how mercury impacts us as mothers, unborn babies, and communities' health and environment. And moms are pushing for clean school buses and 100% electrification by 2035. In 2045 by the latest, including the fight to protect mothers and babies from climate change. These policies and this fact sheet will help our communities make connections to air pollution and health impacts. And I think this fact sheet really connects the health impacts that our communities are being impacted with, and bringing it to light without feeling shame about what's going on in our communities, as well as in our immediate families. So I think this is a really a great opportunity for our communities to be really involved in this climate action network that needs to be done across the U.S. And this really would help our Indigenous communities to connect together as well.
Thank you so much, Shayna, and thank you for connecting these issues to your family's personal story. I think that, as parents and advocates, we know that our stories are our most powerful tool in advocating for change because they really help people understand the impacts that our families feel and maybe that their families connecting to their own family's struggles. So I think there's a lot of power in sharing that. And at Moms, we like to encourage families to share their stories of being impacted by pollution with policymakers to help encourage change as well. You can find many of the resources that Shayna referred to on the Moms Clean Air Force website, and also the National Tribal Air Association website has many resources that can help you learn about how these issues might be impacting your community. So I wanted to focus in on the issue of food. I'm going to turn to Mariah now. So food is just such an important facet of well-being, but it's also, as you mentioned, a cornerstone of cultural survival. Can you explain how climate change and air pollution impact Indigenous foodways, native crops, and cultural traditions related to food?
Yeah, so that's a big part of like Indigenous culture for me is like learning our Indigenous foods. And I can speak on behalf of like myself as a Diné person, you know, with the prolonged drought, we're seeing like less and less farmers and out here in the Southwest. So there's a lot of like dry irrigation farming that even like the Hopi people have you know, specialized in, but you know, with continued drought, folks are not able to farm as much anymore, and it's just becoming more and more difficult. And that that goes along with a lot of other staples too, like Indigenous foods is like out there like foraging for food. We're seeing like less and less of that as well. But one of the major sources of pollution that in fact that impacts foods is ozone, so ground level ozone pollution. That we know is very harmful, not just for our lungs, but also for the foliage of a lot of our foods, our crops like squash and watermelon, even conifer tips up in like different parts of the country where, you know, people harvest the spruce tips, you know, to use and to drink, but even that's becoming less prevalent with, you know, climate change and even ozone pollution. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to add any more to that.
I think that
I just wanted to add that during the cold was it the coal mine spill into the San Juan Animas River that impacted the Navajo reservation. It impacted the corn, like it really did impact the crop of Indigenous farmers. And there was a scare of using the water as well from the community that were able to grow. So there was really a lot of skepticism about the water use for the plants, of whether they would be contaminated through that process. So there is a lot of concern around contamination of our water sources when it comes to spills like the gold mine spill that happened like 5 or more years ago. And that halted the Navajo reservation's access to water, as well as the surrounding communities along that river. So those are some of the things that they experienced on these industries that don't clean up after they're done working these resources out.
Absolutely, Shayna. I mean, and you raise a good point. We're focusing on air pollution, but air pollution ends up being water pollution because of the way of the rain cycle. So pollution is coming at us from a lot of different areas when we live close to a source of pollution like a coal plant, for sure.
I just wanted to add something really quick too, Liz.
Yeah.
Along with that though, like I'm seeing like an amazing resurgence of like food sovereignty you know,
Mhm.
Indigenous
Mhm.
communities. Here in Northern Arizona, we have people like the Hopi Tutsqua Permaculture Institute, Talani Lake Enterprise, like these grassroots organizations who are really advocating for like food sovereignty. It's really good, especially with like climate change. We've known this is happening for like the longest time, you know, we've seen warning signs. But what I love seeing is like people, you know, even like Black communities in like urban centers are starting to like reclaim that like inherent right to food. So with climate change, like we it's daunting, but we're still out there, and we're still like fighting for like our traditional foods and for being healthy. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You know, and that just reminds me, I was just seeing news coverage. Sitka Tribe of Alaska is organizing around, you know, the herring fish, which is so important for Tlingit people, is just not prevalent in the same numbers. And they're organizing around trying to have protections for their fish, which I think is really wonderful. Um, so just on that, I wanted to ask you, Carol, how are Indigenous communities responding to the challenges of air pollution and climate change?
Well, when you have organizations such as NTAA, and we have some amazing partners out there, and now we are welcoming Moms Clean Air Force as a new partner. When you band together, you have a much greater voice, and you have power to get out there and change things, because power actually comes with knowledge, the science, and the number of the people who are out there advocating for the rights of individuals. So we will continue to be a voice and advocate for others. In fact, I will be doing a presentation with Indian Health Boards in DC the end of the month. And one of the things that I will be doing with Moms Clean Air Force is presenting your fact sheet to them, because I think a lot of what you have on that sheet is very important. And since we are talking about Indigenous people, it's really important that we show that we have that strength in numbers, and that we are going to use that and move forward, and not only make this a better world for just Indigenous or colored people, but for all people, because that is what it is all about. That is really something that people really could learn from tribal communities. Is it is a community, you know, everyone is everyone's mom and dad, everyone is everyone's grandpa and grandma. It is the unity that we are lacking in this world today to be successful in what we're doing. And that is an important part of what NTAA does, is we bring all of that together and we move forward with that, whether it be through the science, through the advocating, or, you know, through the partnerships that we have acquired and we will continue to acquire.
Wow, Carol, you just fired everybody up. I love that. Awesome.
We are so happy to be able to do this work with NTAA. It's been just a true pleasure. And I just wanted to sort of close us out by asking all of you, if you can just briefly say, and you don't all have to answer if you don't want to, how can people get involved? How can people make a difference? And I'll turn to Shayna first.
Well, I think being involved, it can be a simple action of sign and petition. That's a great one step to start getting involved, is taking action with petitions, especially with Moms Clean Air Force, since we focused a lot with the EPA and the federal environmental clean air policy. So I think that's a great way to start, as well as once you take action, you can sign up to receive regular information about the issues we work on. Mom's website has fact sheets that explain air quality, climate change issues in ways that are engaging and straightforward. You can watch and follow Mom's Clean Air Force on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to get to know our moms fighting for clean air, for our children's right to breathe and play in a safe environment. We are organizing on a state and local issues in many parts of the U.S. You can check out the website to see if there is a mom's organizer in your state, as well as check out the National Tribal Air Association website at NTAA tribalair.org and become a member and stay up to date, stay updated with our current actions with clean air and health. Growing up, hearing the stories of how the snowstorms used to be in the Four Corners area of New Mexico, where my family resides. I remember as a kid, frogs used to come out of the ground when it rained, and there used to be more hummingbirds. The grass used to grow for the herds. Climate change is already happening. Climate impacts are accumulating, and we need communities to speak up for the health and environment for all our children. Scientists have been given a national call to prepare for the changes needed to address the climate crisis, but we need moms, dads, and caregivers, just like Carol was saying. We need our communities to stand together and voice together and get out of our comfort zone. And I'm a shy person, so I've been pushing myself out into the uncomfort of being around communities that are not of my own. But that's natural for Indigenous communities, and especially in the urban areas, that we are the only Indigenous people speaking up because of our numbers are so staggered. But that's why it's important to speak up on these issues so that we can defend our next 7 generations. So it's really about the next 7 generations.
Yeah. Is there anything, Carol or Mariah, that you'd like to add before we close?
I would just like to say there are 574 tribes nationwide in this country, and we only have 153 that are actually member tribes. And anyone can be a member tribe. Any tribe can be a member tribe as long as you're federally recognized. It's free to join. It's the advocacy that we have to offer, to these tribes is just amazing, along with the partnerships, again, as we're doing here with Mom's Clean Air Force. We have many other partnerships, and we have work groups that we have that if they don't want to be a member tribe, they can just jump on those monthly calls and they can learn about mobile sources, indoor air quality, which affects everybody numerously. And there are other organizations. Some may come, some may go, but we have a couple that remain strong and forthgoing. So yes, don't be afraid and jump out there and take a look at our website. And even if you just have a need and you don't want to join, give us a holler and we can direct you to a resource that you may be looking for. But definitely plug into the system, because that is what we are all here for. We're here to make everybody else's life a little bit easier, a little bit less stressful, because we've already done the research and we can direct you to where you can find answers.
Absolutely. I think for me, my background is in social work and not in environmental protection. And one of the best things that I learned coming into this field is you don't need to be an expert. You just need to be willing to ask questions. And I could definitely say that the staff at the National Tribal Air Association is incredibly friendly. And I want to thank Mariah Ashley so much for all of the work you've done and for joining us today. Andy Bessler at the National Tribal Air Association is not here today. He's been a huge part of this work, and again, just a wonderful person to know. So please reach out. And Carol, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your deep expertise and leadership. I really, really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and Shayna, you have been such a beacon of where we could go in expanding this work and in bringing attention to how Indigenous communities are impacted by climate change and air quality. And I want to really thank you for your leadership and your hard work. It's wonderful.
Thank you, and I really appreciate everybody collaborating in this work. And I know how difficult it is to schedule on one hour. So thank you, Carol, for really taking this on, and Mariah for doing all the work of leading up to this point, and Liz and Molly, thank you for putting this together. I think this is very awesome and another beginning.
That's right. I need to thank Molly Rausch, also the Public Health Director at MOMS, for her wonderful steady hand and leadership in this. Please take a look at our new resource, Indigenous People and Air Pollution in the United States. You can find it on the NTAA website or the MOMS website, and you'll find other resources there as well. And I want to thank all of our viewers. We really have appreciated this conversation. We would love to hear from you, and we hope that this will inspire you to take action for clean air in your own community, wherever it may be. Thank you so much, and goodbye.